Hey, in this video, I'm going to do a project that's pretty special to me. I have to admit, the main reason I'm making this video is that I'm really stubborn. To start, I'll need an acacia log about 30 to 40 centimeters in diameter. As you can imagine, it's not easy to find this kind of wood. You can't just buy it at the corner store. This time I had to take a several-hour trip to get it, but it's exactly what I needed. It's got an irregular shape and was cut a few years ago, so it should be nice and dry. My most popular videos are the ones where I build my puzzle tables. You might have seen one. They have millions of views. In these videos, I get a lot of comments saying that a table like this is weak and will break easily. So I've decided to show that my tables are stronger than they look. Actually, the idea wasn't completely mine. A few months ago, a customer asked if it would be possible to make a bench using this technique. My first thought was to say no, a bench like that wouldn't hold up. But then I kept thinking about it and said to myself, why not? I just need to figure out a way for the wood not to bear all the weight. I'm probably getting into a project that I'll end up regretting and spending way more time on than I planned. But I love challenges, so I'm going to give it a shot. I came up with the idea of inserting a steel structure in the bottom of the bench. This structure needs to be very strong to prevent it from bending when someone sits on it, so the wood doesn't move and potentially crack or break. The first thing I did was remove all the bark from the wood. These logs seem to be quite dry, but I think they still have too much moisture for this type of project. I'll know for sure once I've sliced them up. I'm going to cut slices approximately 10 centimeters thick. Usually I make my tables about half that thickness, but I want this bench to end up being around 8 centimeters thick. I think this is going to make the process even more complicated. To cut the slices, I use an electric chainsaw that isn't very powerful. For this job, I prefer to have more precision than power to get the slices as straight as possible. So I need the blades to be very sharp. The guys from Savior sent me some of their chainsaw chains to try out and give my opinion on. They are a brand specialized in small engine parts and offer services for home and garden enthusiasts. I think there's no better way to test a chain than by cutting a few slices of this acacia. It's an especially hard and dense wood, and from experience, I can tell you it's an expert at dulling blades. So far, easy and smooth. Even though these chains are very competitively priced and affordable for residents, they're made from German steel that's especially resistant to wear and corrosion. Sometimes I do collaborations like this to earn a little extra so I can keep making videos, but I've never featured a product that fits so well with my content and could be so interesting for my audience. Obviously, I didn't pay for these chains, but to be honest, I would buy them myself to use in my daily life. I wouldn't say that if I didn't truly believe it after trying them out. If you're looking for some good chains for your chainsaw, I've left a link in the video description. The wood still had a bit of moisture, so I put it in a kiln for a few days. Working with end grain, I like the wood to be completely dry. When I cut it, the moisture content in the center of the log was around 11%. For a typical project, this percentage would be fine to start working with, but not for this one. Here, moisture is the most important factor to consider if I want to prevent the wood from warping or cracking. The first thing I want to do is make sure I have enough wood. I've drawn the outline with the final measurements the bench needs to have. Even though it might look like there's plenty of wood, once you start fitting the pieces together and filling in all the gaps, you end up using a lot more than it seemed at first. It wouldn't be the first time I've run short on wood making a table like this. I'm going to start putting together my puzzle. I try to find the pieces that fit together without having to cut too much wood. It creates a nicer and more harmonious effect if you can get the slices to fit together as naturally as possible. It's not easy and it takes a lot of time, but personally, I like the end result. To make the slices fit together as easily as possible, it's best to make the edges perfectly perpendicular. That way, you can easily transfer the outline of one piece to another with a pencil. Sometimes it's not possible to do it that way, and it gets a bit tricky. The best method I've found is to transfer the outline of one piece onto paper, cut it out, and then trace it onto the other piece. For those of you who are already familiar with my channel, you know that in almost all of my videos so far, I haven't used narration, I just added subtitles and music. I've been asked many times to add voiceovers to my videos, but I've also had a lot of people say they like them with just subtitles. So I've decided to do this video with voiceovers, but I'm still unsure about what my audience prefers. It would really help me if you could leave a comment letting me know what you prefer, so I can make a decision for my future videos. I didn't learn this technique from anyone. It came to me a while ago, and I've been gradually improving it by making mistakes, discovering problems, and finding solutions. I'm not saying I invented it. I'm sure hundreds of people have made tables like this before me, but I haven't found a YouTube video from before I started making mine. I get a lot of messages, especially on Instagram, from woodworkers who have created things inspired by this technique. They ask me questions and send me photos of their results. Honestly, it makes me really happy that people all over the world are using this idea. It's definitely time-consuming. This 10-second time-lapse actually covers about 5 hours of work. It's been tough, but I'm almost done with the puzzle. I just need to fill in the smaller gaps. To do that, I'm going to trace the outline of each gap onto paper, transfer it onto wood, and cut it with the bandsaw. It's not easy to cut pieces that are both so thick and small. You have to be careful. Finally, I'll square up the edges. The bench needs to have final dimensions of 152 centimeters long by 45 centimeters wide, as it's a custom piece for a client. Now I'm going to make a simple mold out of melamine. It's really important to seal it properly so the epoxy resin we pour won't leak out. To keep the epoxy from sticking to the mold, I'm going to line the melamine with packing tape. You can also use some non-stick products that are supposed to make it easier to release the mold, but I personally don't like them. Whenever I've tried them, I've had trouble with the release. Tape never lets me down. "90% of the problems when working with epoxy are leaks, so I'll say it again. Make sure the mold is completely sealed. If you don't, this stuff will find a way to escape and ruin your project and your workshop floor. Another thing to keep in mind is that wood floats in epoxy, so you need to find a way to keep it down. I'm going to stick each piece to the bottom of the mold with silicone. You could also put weight on top or clamp it. Even though the gaps between the pieces are very small, I'm going to use deep pour epoxy. The piece is quite thick, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. Of course, it's also crucial to use high-quality resin. It's summer here and it's pretty hot, so the resin is cured quickly. After just 4 days, it's ready to be removed from the mold. Thanks to the packing tape, the mold comes off easily with just a few taps. As I always say in my videos, if anyone has any questions about the process or anything else, feel free to leave a comment. I always try to answer them all. I also welcome any kind of advice and constructive criticism. I even enjoy non-constructive criticism. I have fun responding to those. Now comes my least favorite part of making a table like this, flattening it. It's noisy, messy, and slow. If I could find a way to skip this step, I'd be a much happier person. Even though it might not seem necessary, it's important to flatten the bottom side too. If we don't do it right away, we'll run into serious problems. The top will start absorbing moisture from the air, while the bottom stays sealed by the epoxy and doesn't absorb anything. This will cause the piece to start warping within hours. Now it's time to square up the edges. My track saw isn't big enough to do it in one pass, so I decided to finish the job with the router. And this is where I made one of the worst mistakes I've ever made in woodworking. Even if it doesn't seem like it, the router is one of the most dangerous power tools. The reason is that it's loose in our hands and not fixed in place like a table saw, for example. If you have a kickback with a table saw, the wood gets thrown back. But if it happens with a router, the tool itself gets thrown, spinning at 20,000 revolutions per minute. Honestly, at first, I thought about not including this shot in the video and pretending it didn't happen, but that didn't seem fair. This is also part of woodworking, and even though it doesn't show me in the best light, it might help others avoid making the same mistake. Let me try to explain what happened. When you start the router, the bit shouldn't touch anything while it's revving up, or it'll get thrown. I know that, and you can see that I positioned the bit a safe distance from the wood, as you're supposed to. The problem is that I have a new router that I bought a couple of weeks ago, and it's one of the most powerful on the market. It has so much force that no matter how firmly you hold it, it moves a bit when you start it. That small movement caused the bit to touch the wood while it was still speeding up. The rest you've already seen. To avoid this from happening, I recommend always starting the router with the bit raised, then lowering it a couple of seconds later and beginning to work. I'm not sure if now is the best time to remind you to subscribe to my channel, but if after seeing all this you still want to subscribe, it must mean you're really enjoying the video. After removing the router marks with the belt sander, I'm making a large groove on the underside of the bench to insert the steel frame into the wood. Yes, you've all noticed that I'm using my old router for this. There's no need to comment on it. I think the reason is pretty obvious. I'm sure this is the largest insert I've ever made in my life. Now, I'm going to make a steel tube frame. I won't go into too much detail about the process for two reasons. First, most people watching this video are probably interested in woodworking, not metalworking. And second, and more importantly, I'm not qualified at all to teach anyone about metalworking. If you want to see how to make a proper steel frame, You can find tons of videos from professional metalworkers who really know what they're doing, unlike me. So, considering all that, I'm really proud of how well my steel frame turned out. It's super strong and has pretty decent finishes. To attach it to the wood, I'm going to use threaded inserts. That way, it can be put on and taken off whenever necessary. Yeah, I know what you're thinking right now. This bench is going to weigh a ton, and you're right. But I'd rather it be heavy and ensure it can handle people sitting on it without bending or breaking. I finally got perfectly straight edges just using the track saw and the belt sander. I'm going to round the edges using a 3mm radius router bit. To fill in small holes and cracks in the wood and micro bubbles in the epoxy, I always use black cyanoacrylate. It's a bit of a tedious job, but it's worth it if you want a perfect finish. We're almost done. Next, it's time to sand the entire surface of the bench. I'll use sandpaper in grits 80, 120, 150, 180, and 240. I like to make sure I don't skip any steps to completely remove all the marks and get a smooth and even finish. For those of you curious about the price of this bench, I have no problem sharing it. I charged $4,000 for it. Now that it's finished and knowing I put over 100 hours into it, plus the cost of materials, taxes, and so on, I'm not sure if I'd take on a job like this for that price again. What do you think? Does it seem too expensive to you? Initially, I thought about using polyurethane varnish or another very scratch-resistant finish. But I really don't like the look it gives the wood. It's like putting a plastic layer on top. It loses the natural texture and shine of the wood. I've decided to go with hard wax oil like I use on my tables. I'll apply 3 or 4 coats to make it as durable as possible. Plus, if needed in a few years, it would be very easy to give it a light sanding and apply another coat of this finish. Finally, I just need to attach these black steel legs to the frame as the client prefers, and the bench will be done. Thanks a lot for watching the video until the end. I hope you enjoyed it and had a good time watching. See you next time.